In the preface of Thinking, Fast, and Slow, Daniel Kahneman highlights the central theme of his book, that the mind operates through two different systems, one fast and intuitive, System 1, and the other slow and deliberate, System 2. He explains that these two systems influence our decision-making processes and that our biases and heuristics often lead us astray, resulting in errors in judgment. Kahneman discusses how he and his collaborator Amos Tversky developed their research on judgment and decision-making over several decades, studying how people think and make decisions in a variety of contexts. He also notes that their work has practical applications in many fields, including medicine, law, economics, and public policy. The preface provides readers with an overview of what they can expect from the book, including discussions of how biases affect our judgments, how we form beliefs and make choices, and how we can improve our decision-making skills. Overall, the preface sets the stage for the rest of the book, highlighting the importance of understanding the complexities of the mind and the ways in which we can work to overcome our cognitive biases. Part 1. Two Systems. Chapter 1. The Characters of the Story. In Chapter 1, Kahneman introduces the two characters that dominate the book, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the intuitive, automatic, and fast-thinking part of the brain, while System 2 is the rational, deliberate, and slow-thinking part. System 1 is constantly at work, making judgments and decisions without conscious awareness, while System 2 requires conscious effort and attention. Kahneman suggests that most people rely too heavily on System 1 thinking, leading to biases and errors in judgment. He argues that understanding the limitations of our cognitive processes is essential for making better decisions. One important concept introduced in this chapter is the distinction between cognitive ease and cognitive strain. Cognitive ease refers to the ease with which we process information, while cognitive strain refers to the effort required to process information. People tend to prefer cognitive ease, and this preference can lead to errors in judgment. Chapter 2, Attention and Effort. In Chapter 2, Kahneman discusses the relationship between attention and effort in the cognitive processes of System 2 thinking. He argues that attention is a limited resource that requires effort and can be easily depleted, leading to mistakes and errors in judgment. Kahneman also introduces the concept of cognitive load, which refers to the amount of mental effort required to complete a task. Cognitive load can be influenced by various factors, such as the complexity of the task, the familiarity of the task, and the presence of distractions. Kahneman suggests that people can improve their cognitive performance by managing their attention and reducing cognitive load, for example, by breaking complex tasks into smaller components or eliminating distractions. The chapter also discusses the relationship between attention and working memory, with attention acting as a gatekeeper for the limited capacity of working memory. Finally, Kahneman suggests that the ability to sustain attention and effort is a valuable skill that can be developed with practice. Chapter 3, The Lazy Controller. In Chapter 3, Kahneman discusses the role of the cognitive system in conserving energy and reducing effort. He introduces the concept of the lazy controller, which refers to the cognitive system's tendency to default to System 1 thinking whenever possible to reduce cognitive effort. Kahneman suggests that this tendency is an evolutionary adaptation that allowed our ancestors to conserve energy and respond quickly to threats in their environment. However, in modern life, this tendency can lead to errors in judgment and biases. Kahneman provides examples of how the lazy controller can lead to mistakes, such as in the context of statistical reasoning or making predictions. He also introduces the concept of cognitive biases, which are systematic errors in thinking that result from the lazy controller's reliance on System 1 thinking. Kahneman suggests that understanding the biases and limitations of our cognitive processes is essential for making better decisions and avoiding errors. Before we continue, we would like to inform you that we release these summaries in audio format on Spotify before we release them on YouTube in video format, with subtitles. We have also created a goldmine of information which you can get exclusive access to by supporting us on Patreon. You get in-depth summaries plus scripts, usually twice the length of our YouTube content, a list of the top 20 key takeaways and exercises, summary requests, and more. Thank you for the support and don't forget to hit the like button. Chapter 4, The Associative Machine. Chapter 4 introduces the concept of the associative machine, which refers to the cognitive system's ability to automatically and effortlessly form connections between different ideas and concepts. The associative machine plays a crucial role in System 1 thinking, allowing people to make quick and intuitive judgments based on past experiences and associations. However, these associations can also lead to biases and errors in judgment. Kahneman discusses the concept of priming, which refers to the unconscious influence that a stimulus can have on subsequent behavior or decisions. He provides examples of how priming can influence people's judgments and behaviors, such as in the context of making judgments about others based on superficial characteristics or stereotypes. Kahneman also discusses the role of emotions in the associative machine, highlighting how emotional associations can influence people's judgments and decisions. Overall, this chapter emphasizes the importance of understanding the role of the associative machine in decision-making and being aware of how it can lead to biases and errors. Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease. Chapter 5 discusses the concept of cognitive ease, which refers to the ease and fluency with which information is processed in the cognitive system. Kahneman argues that people tend to prefer information that is easy to process and avoid information that is difficult or requires effort to understand. This preference for cognitive ease can lead to biases and errors in judgment, as people may rely too heavily on their initial impressions or associations. Kahneman provides examples of how cognitive ease can influence people's judgments, such as in the context of advertising or political campaigns. He also discusses the concept of the mere exposure effect, which refers to the tendency for people to prefer things that are familiar to them, even if they have no real basis for liking them. Overall, this chapter highlights the importance of being aware of the influence of cognitive ease on decision-making and striving to overcome biases that may result from this preference. Chapter 6, Norms, Surprises, and Causes. Chapter 6 discusses the role of norms, surprises, and causes in decision-making. Kahneman argues that people often rely on norms, or socially accepted standards of behavior, to guide their decision-making. However, these norms can also lead to biases and errors if they are not based on accurate or objective information. The chapter also discusses the impact of surprises on decision-making, as unexpected events can lead people to question their assumptions and change their judgments. Finally, Kahneman explores the concept of causality and how people often search for causes to explain events, even when there may not be a clear causal relationship. This tendency to search for causes can lead to errors in judgment and biases. Overall, this chapter emphasizes the importance of being aware of the influence of norms, surprises, and causality on decision-making and striving to make decisions based on accurate and objective information. Chapter 7, A Machine for Jumping to Conclusions. In Chapter 7, Kahneman discusses how people tend to jump to conclusions based on limited information and biases, leading to errors in judgment. He explains that the mind is like a machine that constantly generates possible explanations and causal relationships to make sense of the world. However, this process can lead to overconfidence and biases if the information used to generate these explanations is incomplete or misleading. Kahneman also introduces the concept of the halo effect, where people's overall impression of a person or situation can influence their judgment of specific aspects. Additionally, he explores how people often rely on stereotypes and other biases to make quick judgments, which can lead to discrimination and other harmful outcomes. Overall, this chapter emphasizes the importance of being aware of biases and jumping to conclusions and taking steps to mitigate these tendencies in decision-making. Chapter 8, How Judgments Happen. In Chapter 8, Kahneman discusses how people form judgments and the many cognitive biases that influence those judgments. He suggests that people rely heavily on heuristics or mental shortcuts when making judgments, rather than relying on deliberate and rational thought. These heuristics can lead to errors in judgment, as people tend to overestimate their abilities and rely too much on limited information. Kahneman also explores the role of intuition in judgment making and the ways in which it can be biased. He discusses how emotions, memories, and even bodily sensations can influence our judgments, leading to mistakes and inaccuracies. He argues that people must be aware of these biases and work to overcome them by using rational thought and objective analysis. Overall, Chapter 8 highlights the complexity of judgment making and the many factors that can influence our perceptions and beliefs. By recognizing these biases and taking steps to minimize their impact, people can improve their decision making and avoid common errors in judgment. Chapter 9 Answering an Easier Question. In Chapter 9, Kahneman introduces the concept of heuristics, which are mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that allow us to make quick and effortless judgments. He discusses how the use of heuristics can lead to biases in decision-making, specifically the availability heuristic, which is the tendency to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily we can bring examples to mind. Kahneman notes that the availability heuristic can be influenced by a variety of factors, including media coverage, personal experiences, and emotional reactions. He also describes how the availability heuristic can lead to errors in judgment, such as overestimating the likelihood of rare events or underestimating the importance of more common events. The chapter concludes by discussing the relationship between heuristics and the more deliberate and effortful thinking processes involved in solving complex problems. While heuristics can be useful in many situations, they can also lead to errors and biases if used inappropriately. Therefore, it is important to understand the limitations of heuristics and to use them in combination with more deliberate thinking processes to make well-informed decisions. Part 2. Heuristics and Biases. Chapter 10, The Law of Small Numbers. Chapter 10 discusses the law of small numbers, which refers to the tendency of people to overestimate the reliability of small samples of data. The chapter presents several examples of this phenomenon, including the experiences of investors and gamblers. The chapter argues that people often make decisions based on too little data, and this can lead to overconfidence and incorrect conclusions. The chapter also discusses the concept of regression to the mean, which states that extreme results are likely to be followed by more moderate results. This means that people should be cautious in interpreting data that seems to show a dramatic effect or trend. The chapter concludes by emphasizing the importance of gathering more data before drawing conclusions and making decisions, particularly when the sample size is small. Chapter 11, Anchors. Chapter 11 explores the concept of anchors, which are arbitrary numbers or values that people use as reference points when making decisions. These anchors can heavily influence our judgments and choices, even if they have no logical connection to the decision at hand. The chapter covers several experiments that demonstrate how anchors can impact our decision-making, including the famous Wheel of Fortune study. In this study, participants were asked to spin a wheel and then estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Those who had spun a higher number on the wheel gave significantly higher estimates than those who had spun a lower number. Kahneman also discusses ways to counteract the influence of anchors, such as deliberately selecting alternative anchors or considering the problem from a different perspective. He emphasizes the importance of being aware of the potential impact of anchors in our decision-making processes and taking steps to mitigate their effects. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of recognizing and managing the role of anchors in our decision-making, in order to make more informed and rational choices. Chapter 12, The Science of Availability. Chapter 12 discusses the availability heuristic, a mental shortcut that people use to estimate the likelihood of events based on how easily they can be recalled from memory. The chapter covers several experiments that demonstrate how the availability heuristic can lead to biases and errors in judgment, including the fear of flying phenomenon. Kahneman also explores the role of the media in shaping the availability of information, and how this can impact our perceptions of risk and likelihood. He notes that vivid, emotionally charged events are more likely to be remembered and thus have a greater impact on our judgments, even if they are not representative of the overall probability of the event. The chapter also discusses strategies for mitigating the effects of the availability heuristic, such as using statistical information to make decisions and seeking out diverse perspectives and sources of information. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of being aware of the availability heuristic and taking steps to counteract its potential biases in our decision-making processes. Chapter 13, Availability, Emotion, and Risk. In Chapter 13, the author explores the relationship between emotion and risk perception. He notes that emotions can strongly influence our judgments and decision-making processes, particularly when it comes to evaluating risks. Kahneman discusses several experiments that demonstrate how emotions can impact risk perception, such as the affect heuristic study, which found that people tend to overestimate the risk of negative events that are associated with strong emotions, like terrorism or violent crime. The chapter also covers the role of individual differences in risk perception, such as age and personality factors. For example, older individuals tend to perceive risks as more severe than younger individuals, while individuals with high levels of neuroticism may be more prone to anxiety and fear. Kahneman concludes by emphasizing the importance of being aware of the impact of emotions on risk perception and taking steps to mitigate potential biases. This can include seeking out diverse perspectives, considering statistical information, and engaging in deliberate reflection and analysis when making decisions about risky situations. Overall, the chapter highlights the complex interplay between emotions and risk perception, and underscores the importance of understanding this relationship in order to make more informed and rational decisions. Chapter 14, Tom W.'s Specialty. In Chapter 14, the author shares a personal anecdote about a friend named Tom W., who worked as a financial advisor and had a reputation for being particularly skilled at picking stocks. Kahneman uses this story to illustrate the concept of expert intuition, which refers to the ability of experts to make quick, accurate judgments based on their extensive experience and knowledge. However, Kahneman notes that expert intuition can also be subject to biases and errors, particularly when experts operate in complex and uncertain environments, such as financial markets. He discusses several studies that demonstrate the limitations of expert intuition in these contexts, such as the failure of financial analysts to predict the 2008 financial crisis. Kahneman concludes by emphasizing the importance of being aware of the potential biases and limitations of expert intuition and taking steps to mitigate their effects. This can include seeking out diverse perspectives, gathering as much information as possible, and engaging in deliberate reflection and analysis when making complex decisions. Overall, the chapter highlights the challenges of relying on expert intuition in uncertain and complex environments, and underscores the importance of using a range of approaches and strategies to make more informed and accurate judgments. Chapter 15, Linda, Less is More. Chapter 15 centers around the concept of conjunction fallacy, which occurs when people mistakenly judge the co-occurrence of two events as more likely than either event alone. This fallacy is illustrated through the story of Linda, a fictional character who is described as a feminist and a bank teller. Participants in a study were asked to estimate the probability that Linda was a bank teller, or a bank teller who is also a feminist. Despite the fact that the former is more likely, many participants mistakenly judged the latter as more probable. Kahneman uses this example to illustrate the impact of framing and the importance of considering base rates in decision-making. He also discusses the challenges of overcoming the conjunction fallacy, which can be difficult due to the vividness and coherence of the conjunctive statement. Overall, the chapter highlights the potential pitfalls of relying on heuristics and the importance of considering statistical information when making judgments and decisions. Chapter 16, Causes trump statistics. Chapter 16 explores the concept of causal illusions, which occur when people perceive a causal relationship between two events even when there is no logical basis for such a relationship. Kahneman notes that humans have a natural tendency to infer causality from correlation, which can lead to errors and biases in judgment and decision-making. The chapter discusses several experiments that demonstrate the power of causal illusions, including the hot hand phenomenon in basketball and the belief that a person's facial features can reveal their personality traits. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of considering alternative explanations and gathering additional information when evaluating potential causal relationships. He also notes the challenges of overcoming the allure of causal illusions, particularly when they align with pre-existing beliefs and expectations. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of being aware of the potential for causal illusions and taking steps to mitigate their effects, in order to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions. Chapter 17, Regression to the Mean. Chapter 17 introduces the concept of regression to the mean, which refers to the tendency for extreme events to be followed by more moderate ones. Kahneman notes that this phenomenon can lead to errors in judgment and decision-making, as people often attribute the regression to some intervention or manipulation when in fact it is simply a natural statistical fluctuation. The chapter discusses several examples of regression to the mean, including the performance of professional athletes and the effectiveness of medical treatments. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing regression to the mean and using statistical analysis to accurately evaluate the effectiveness of interventions and treatments. The chapter also explores the role of optimism bias in contributing to misunderstandings of regression to the mean, as people often overestimate their ability to control or predict future events based on past performance. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of being aware of regression to the mean and using statistical analysis to accurately evaluate performance and outcomes, in order to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions. Chapter 18, Taming Intuitive Predictions. In Chapter 18, the author discusses the challenges of taming intuitive predictions, which are judgments made quickly and automatically based on limited information. He notes that intuitive predictions are often subject to biases and errors, particularly when they are influenced by stereotypes and preconceptions. The chapter covers several experiments that demonstrate the limitations of intuitive predictions, such as the personality judging study where participants made inaccurate predictions about the personalities of strangers based solely on their appearance. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of being aware of the potential biases and limitations of intuitive predictions and taking steps to mitigate their effects. This can include seeking out diverse perspectives, gathering as much information as possible, and engaging in deliberate reflection and analysis when making predictions. Overall, the chapter highlights the challenges of relying on intuitive predictions and underscores the importance of using a range of approaches and strategies to make more informed and accurate judgments. Part 3. Overconfidence. Chapter 19, The Illusion of Understanding. In Chapter 19, Kahneman discusses how our minds create a sense of understanding based on limited information, even when we don't fully comprehend a subject. He introduces the concept of what you see is all there is, Wysiati, which refers to how our brains automatically fill in missing information to create a coherent story, even if it's not accurate. This can lead to overconfidence in our understanding of a situation and make it difficult to consider alternative perspectives. Kahneman also explains how experts are not immune to this illusion and can be misled by incomplete information. He provides examples of how the illusion of understanding can lead to poor decisions in various fields, such as finance and medicine. Finally, he suggests several ways to overcome this illusion, including seeking out diverse perspectives, being open to feedback, and recognizing the limits of our knowledge. Chapter 20, The Illusion of Validity. Chapter 20 explores the concept of the illusion of validity, which refers to the tendency of people to overestimate the accuracy of their judgments and predictions based on incomplete or limited information. Kahneman notes that this illusion can be particularly strong when people have access to detailed information that appears to support their judgments, even when that information is irrelevant or unreliable. The chapter covers several examples of the illusion of validity, including the hiring practices of businesses and the use of personality tests in employee selection. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of being aware of the potential biases and limitations of judgments based on limited information, and taking steps to mitigate their effects. This can include using statistical analysis to evaluate the accuracy of predictions, gathering additional information and feedback, and engaging in deliberate reflection and analysis when making important decisions. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of avoiding the illusion of validity and using a range of approaches and strategies to make more accurate and informed judgments and predictions. Chapter 21, Intuitions versus Formulas. In Chapter 21, the author discusses the debate between intuition and formulas in decision-making. He notes that while intuition can be powerful and effective, it is also subject to biases and errors, particularly when it is influenced by stereotypes and preconceptions. The chapter covers several experiments that demonstrate the benefits and limitations of both intuition and formulas, including the clinical versus actuarial study where formula-based predictions were found to be more accurate than those based on expert intuition. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of using a range of approaches and strategies in decision-making, including both intuition and formulas. He also notes the importance of considering the specific context and requirements of each decision, and tailoring the approach accordingly. Overall, the chapter highlights the challenges and opportunities presented by the debate between intuition and formulas, and underscores the importance of using a range of approaches to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions. Chapter 22, Expert Intuition, When Can We Trust It? Chapter 22 discusses the concept of expert intuition, which refers to the ability of experienced professionals to make accurate and effective judgments based on their knowledge and expertise. However, Kahneman notes that expert intuition is subject to several limitations and challenges, particularly when it is based on incomplete or ambiguous information. The chapter covers several examples of expert intuition, including medical diagnosis and stock market predictions. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of being aware of the potential biases and limitations of expert intuition, and taking steps to mitigate their effects. This can include seeking out diverse perspectives, using statistical analysis to evaluate the accuracy of predictions, and engaging in deliberate reflection and analysis when making decisions. Overall, the chapter highlights the complex nature of expert intuition and the importance of using it judiciously in order to make more informed and accurate judgments. Chapter 23, The Outside View. Chapter 23 discusses the concept of the outside view, which involves taking a broader perspective when making predictions or decisions by considering general information about similar cases. Kahneman notes that people often focus too much on specific details and personal experiences when making predictions, which can lead to biases and errors. The chapter covers several examples of the outside view, including the planning of large construction projects and the prediction of the outcomes of legal cases. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of using the outside view in order to improve the accuracy and reliability of predictions and decisions. The author also provides several practical suggestions for using the outside view, such as gathering relevant statistics and using analogies to similar cases. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of taking a broader perspective and using a range of approaches in order to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions. Chapter 24, The Engine of Capitalism. Chapter 24 explores the role of optimism and overconfidence in the engine of capitalism. Kahneman notes that entrepreneurs and investors often exhibit a high degree of optimism and overconfidence in their ability to succeed, which can lead to both successes and failures. The chapter covers several examples of the role of optimism and overconfidence in business, including the dot-com bubble and the financial crisis of 2008. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing the potential biases and limitations of optimism and overconfidence, and taking steps to mitigate their effects. The author also provides several practical suggestions for avoiding the pitfalls of optimism and overconfidence, such as gathering diverse perspectives and seeking out feedback. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of using a range of approaches and strategies in order to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions in the context of capitalism. Part 4. Choices. Chapter 25, Bernoulli's Errors. Chapter 25 examines the concept of expected utility theory, which posits that people make decisions based on the expected value of their outcomes. However, Kahneman notes that expected utility theory has several limitations and challenges, particularly when it comes to the evaluation of probabilities and the consideration of emotional factors. The chapter covers several examples of the limitations of expected utility theory, including the framing effect and the influence of emotions on decision-making. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing these limitations and taking steps to mitigate their effects. The author also provides several practical suggestions for improving decision-making, such as considering a range of possible outcomes and weighing the potential emotional impact of each option. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of using a range of approaches and strategies in order to make more informed and accurate judgments and decisions. Chapter 26, Prospect Theory. Chapter 26 introduces prospect theory, which explains how people make decisions based on their perceptions of gains and losses, rather than on the objective value of outcomes. The chapter covers several key principles of prospect theory, including the notion of diminishing sensitivity, which holds that the subjective value of each additional unit of gain or loss decreases as the magnitude of the outcome increases. Kahneman also explores the idea of loss aversion, which suggests that people are more sensitive to losses than to gains, and are willing to take greater risks to avoid losses. The author notes that prospect theory has important implications for decision-making in a range of contexts, including finance, public policy, and personal decision-making. The chapter concludes with several practical suggestions for using prospect theory to improve decision-making, such as framing decisions in terms of gains rather than losses and being aware of the biases that can arise from loss aversion. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of considering the subjective value of outcomes and the role of emotions in decision-making. Chapter 27, The Endowment Effect. Chapter 27 explores the endowment effect, which refers to the tendency of people to place a higher value on objects they own or possess than on identical objects that they do not own. The chapter covers several key examples of the endowment effect, such as the willingness of people to pay more to retain a good they already own than they would pay to acquire the same good as a new purchase. Kahneman notes that the endowment effect is a manifestation of loss aversion and the status quo bias, which both contribute to people's resistance to change. The chapter also discusses the implications of the endowment effect for decision-making in a range of contexts, such as negotiations, auctions, and real estate transactions. The author concludes by offering several practical strategies for overcoming the endowment effect, such as reframing the context of a decision, offering more choice to the decision-maker, and establishing clear criteria for evaluating the options available. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of recognizing the endowment effect and taking steps to mitigate its impact on decision-making. Chapter 28, Bad Events. Chapter 28 is focused on the impact of bad events on our lives. The chapter explains that bad events are much more powerful than good ones, and humans tend to overreact to negative experiences while underestimating the impact of positive ones. Kahneman refers to a range of experiments and studies to show how people react differently to gains and losses. He describes the concept of loss aversion, where people are more sensitive to losses than gains. The chapter also explores the peak end rule, which suggests that our memories of past events are based on their most intense moments and how they ended. The author notes that people tend to be highly influenced by rare, highly emotional, and dramatic events. He explains how this can lead to biases in decision-making, as well as how people tend to focus more on the outcome of an event than the process of how it occurred. The chapter concludes by offering insights into how individuals can reduce the impact of bad events in their lives by reframing them, changing the context, and focusing on the positive aspects of the situation. Chapter 29, The Fourfold Pattern. Chapter 29 introduces the fourfold pattern, a framework for analyzing the relationship between the probability of an event and the potential gains or losses associated with it. The fourfold pattern describes four possible outcomes of a decision: gain, loss, certainty, and ambiguity. Kahneman explains that people tend to evaluate gains and losses differently, as well as exhibit different attitudes towards certainty and ambiguity. The chapter discusses how people's choices are influenced by their aversion to losses, which can lead them to avoid risks even if the potential gains outweigh the potential losses. The author also notes that people are more likely to take risks in situations of uncertainty than situations of ambiguity. The fourfold pattern provides a useful tool for understanding decision-making in a range of contexts, from personal finance to public policy. The chapter concludes with an exploration of how individuals and organizations can use the fourfold pattern to make better decisions by recognizing and avoiding common biases and pitfalls. Chapter 30, Rare Events. In Chapter 30 discusses rare events and how they impact decision-making. He explains that our intuition is ill-equipped to deal with rare events because we have little experience with them. As a result, we tend to overestimate the probability of rare events and make poor decisions as a result. Kahneman introduces the concept of the black swan and notes that these rare and unpredictable events can have significant consequences. He also notes that people tend to focus on the consequences of an event rather than the probability of it occurring. This can lead to irrational decisions, such as purchasing insurance against unlikely events. Overall, Kahneman suggests that people should approach rare events with caution and seek out data and analysis rather than relying on intuition. Chapter 31, Risk Policies. In Chapter 31, Kahneman discusses how organizations and institutions approach the management of risk. He argues that many organizations have unrealistic beliefs about their ability to control risks, leading them to overestimate their capacity to predict and manage rare events. Kahneman presents evidence to suggest that the best way to manage risk is to adopt a precautionary principle, which emphasizes caution and prevention, rather than relying on predictions and reactive measures. He also argues that institutions should strive for transparency in their decision-making processes, and be prepared to engage in honest postmortems to identify and learn from mistakes. Finally, Kahneman notes that individuals are often prone to making poor risk management decisions, particularly when faced with ambiguous or emotionally charged situations. He suggests that individuals can improve their decision-making in these contexts by adopting a more systematic and analytical approach to risk assessment. Chapter 32, Keeping Score. In Chapter 32, Kahneman explores the importance of keeping score in decision-making. He explains that people often make decisions based on how they feel in the moment, rather than on accurate information. Kahneman argues that in order to make better decisions, it is important to keep track of outcomes and evaluate them objectively over time. He describes two ways to keep score: outcome monitoring and process monitoring. Outcome monitoring involves keeping track of the final result of a decision, while process monitoring involves tracking the steps taken to achieve the outcome. Kahneman argues that process monitoring is often more effective because it allows for adjustments to be made along the way. Kahneman also discusses the concept of regret aversion and how it can lead to poor decision-making. He suggests that it is important to consider the potential regrets of a decision before making it and to be willing to accept the possibility of regret in order to make the best choice. Overall, Kahneman emphasizes the importance of keeping score and evaluating decisions objectively in order to make better choices in the future. Chapter 33, Reversals. In this chapter, Kahneman discusses the phenomenon of reversals, which occur when the ranking of options or preferences is reversed based on changes in the framing of the problem or the context in which it is presented. He explores several examples, such as the Allais paradox and the Asian disease problem, to illustrate the ways in which people's choices can be inconsistent when different aspects of the problem are emphasized. Kahneman notes that these reversals are evidence of the limitations of human reasoning and the importance of considering context and framing effects when making decisions. He argues that a deeper understanding of these effects can help people make better decisions and avoid common cognitive biases. Finally, he emphasizes the need for decision makers to consider multiple perspectives and to avoid being too confident in their own judgments. Chapter 34, Frames and Reality. Chapter 34 discusses the concept of frames and how they shape our perception of reality. A frame is a context or a way of presenting information that can influence the decisions we make. The chapter explores various examples of how frames can alter our thinking, including how the way a problem is presented can affect our decision-making and how changing the reference point can alter our perceptions of gain and loss. The chapter also discusses the importance of recognizing frames and being aware of how they can affect our thinking. Kahneman suggests that by becoming more aware of the frames that influence our thinking, we can learn to make more informed decisions and avoid falling into cognitive traps. Overall, the chapter highlights the importance of being mindful of the way information is presented and the context in which it is presented. By doing so, we can better navigate complex decision-making situations and make more informed choices. Part 5. Two Selves. Chapter 35, Two Selves. In Chapter 35, Kahneman discusses the concept of the two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is the one who lives in the moment and feels emotions, while the remembering self is the one who forms memories and reflects on experiences. The two selves often have different perspectives and priorities, leading to discrepancies in decision-making. Kahneman argues that the remembering self often dominates, as people tend to make decisions based on what they remember rather than what they actually experienced. This can result in irrational decisions, such as choosing a longer vacation simply because it will create more positive memories, even if it means experiencing more discomfort in the moment. By understanding the different perspectives of the two selves, individuals can make better decisions that prioritize both short-term and long-term happiness. Chapter 36, Life as a Story. In Life as a Story, Kahneman discusses the importance of constructing and experiencing one's life as a coherent narrative. According to him, individuals see their life stories as a sequence of events that have led them to where they are today. People remember significant moments and can also develop a sense of meaning and purpose in life by creating a story with a plotline, characters, and themes. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of the endings of our life stories, which have a significant influence on our overall satisfaction with life. He suggests that we pay close attention to the final chapters of our lives and work to create a positive, meaningful conclusion. By understanding the role of stories in our lives, we can better appreciate our experiences and work towards building a more fulfilling life story. Chapter 37, Experienced Well-Being. In Chapter 37, Kahneman discusses the concept of experienced well-being, which refers to how people feel about their lives as they live them. He notes that people's memories of their past experiences do not always reflect the actual experience they had. For example, people tend to remember the emotional peak of an experience and its ending, rather than the overall experience. Kahneman explains that experienced well-being is a better measure of how happy people are than their remembered well-being. He also discusses the concept of duration neglect, where people neglect to take into account the duration of an experience when evaluating it. Kahneman concludes the chapter by suggesting that people should focus on experiencing more positive emotions in their day-to-day lives to increase their overall experienced well-being. Chapter 38, Thinking About Life. Chapter 38 focuses on the idea of thinking about life and how we perceive our own experiences. Kahneman suggests that the way we remember and evaluate our lives is often based on a small number of key moments and experiences, rather than an objective accounting of all our experiences. He also discusses the importance of focusing on the quality of experiences, rather than the quantity. One key takeaway from this chapter is that our subjective evaluation of our lives is heavily influenced by how we remember our experiences, rather than the actual experiences themselves. Therefore, it is important to pay attention to how we remember our experiences and try to create positive memories. Another takeaway is that we should focus on the quality of our experiences, rather than trying to accumulate as many experiences as possible. Overall, this chapter encourages us to reflect on how we think about our lives and to consider ways to improve our overall well-being. Conclusion. In the conclusion of Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman reflects on the book's main themes and messages. He notes that the book's overarching theme is the dichotomy between two ways of thinking: fast, intuitive, and emotional versus slow, deliberate, and logical. He stresses that while both systems have their strengths and weaknesses, we must learn to recognize their limitations and biases to make better decisions. Kahneman also emphasizes that our subjective experience of life is shaped by both our experiencing selves and our remembering selves. He urges readers to pay attention to both selves and to recognize that our memories of past experiences are often incomplete or distorted. Finally, Kahneman acknowledges the challenges of applying his research findings to practical situations but argues that the effort is worth it. He encourages readers to be mindful of their own thought processes and biases and to seek out diverse perspectives and data to make better decisions.